some black former slaves and freemen who also owned black slaves.
What?
And some became very prominent in politics as well.
So I'm just scrolling on YouTube and I come across a video titled First Slave Owner in the Colonies, Anthony Johnson. And it's like, okay, it's nothing super crazy. But then I look at the thumbnail and it's literally of a black man. I'm like, hold up, right? What is going on? So then I go to the comments before I click the video. It says, the very first comment, highest ranked comment: I'm a black American and a history buff. Wait, let me show y'all this because I want y'all to see it. I'm a black American and a history buff. I've known about black owners for years. Anthony was from Africa, where slavery was normal among tribes or kingdoms. Enslaving other blacks was normal to him. Yet, white people own white... Okay, I always said the battle isn't about race. That's a distraction. The war has always been about the haves and the have-nots. The haves, which are the minority, but have money to brainwash the have-nots to fight among each other on divisive issues. And this is crazy because a lot of this is happening today, like religion, race, and sexual orientation. That is a crazy comment, man. So let's get into these videos because a lot of what he said, I don't know if it's true. It's happening today. And it's something about my channel, I don't like to bring division. Like, I like to kind of make sense of everything. So without further ado, let's get into this video. I hope y'all enjoy. Subscribe to the channel. Let's go.
While slavery existed in the American colonies through the establishment of the United States as a country until the end of the Civil War, there have been many misconceptions about slavery in general. Most Americans are not aware that there were some black former slaves and freemen who also owned black slaves.
What?
And some became very prominent in politics as well, despite the racial prejudice that existed.
This is so hard to believe. Like, y'all don't understand how hard this is for me. Because I'm still in school now, so like, I'm going to get through it, though. This is hard, though.
Some black slave owners inherited their slaves from their masters, who were themselves freed in their wills. Others were either born free or emancipated by their masters and then bought their own slaves, while others were able to buy their own freedom and that of their families. Who were these black slave owners, and how did they attain such a status in a white-dominated society? What set them apart from other blacks, and what made them comparable to whites in some of the colonies and later states? What changed in colonial society, altering the status of indentured servants to lifetime slaves? And why? Who was Anthony Johnson?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, history professor, historian and book author, and we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
The vast majority of African Americans in the United States were enslaved, in all of the states, not just the South. Our first person of note is Anthony Johnson, who was born in Angola and captured by Portuguese slave traders, and he was given the name Antonio. Then his captors sold him into the Atlantic slave trade. He sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the ship James. The Virginia muster, or census, of 1624 lists his name as Antonio, not given, and he was recorded as a Negro in the notes column and indentured. Antonio, later Anthony, was bought by a colonist in Virginia, but treated as an indentured servant, which was not unusual, and Antonio worked for a merchant at the Virginia Company, and he became a Catholic. Johnson was sold as an indentured servant to a white planter named Bennett to work on his Virginia tobacco farm. Technically, he was not a slave, because the slave laws were not passed until 1661 in Virginia, so prior to that date, Africans were not officially considered to be slaves.
This hurts, man. Like, and the reason it hurts is because when you're taught about slavery within schools, you're kind of taught with a morality undertone. And what do I mean by that? It's taught from the perspective that the reason that slavery was so prominent in the United States is because white Americans were less moral than others. And the whole Eurocentric culture is just by far less moral. That's the perspective that is usually taught from. The reason that I'm bringing this up is not to denounce anyone or make anyone feel less than, but I'm just being 100% transparent here. So when I watch something like this and you hear about black slave owners, stuff like that, in the United States, it kind of hurts to listen to because you're like, I don't even know how to explain it, the pain. It just hurts. I can't even explain it. Like, I can't even put it in the real words what I feel right now, but
in that colony. According to the records kept by his benefactor and the existing documents, Anthony was nearly killed in the Indian Massacre of 1622 when the Powhatan Indians attacked colonists in the Tidewater region of Virginia. On Good Friday, they raided the settlement, including the Bennett farm, where Antonio worked, and killed 52 of the 57 men present. Antonio apparently fought back and was wounded and earned the esteem of his master. In 1623, a black woman named Mary arrived aboard the ship Margaret and John. She was brought to work on the same plantation as Antonio, where she was the only woman present. Antonio and Mary married and lived together for more than 40 years. Around 1635, Antonio and Mary completed their indentured servitude, and Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. He first entered the legal record as an unindentured free man when he purchased a calf in 1647. During this early period, free blacks enjoyed relative equality with whites, and about 20% of the free blacks in Virginia owned their own homes and property. In 1662, the Virginia colony passed a law that children in the colony were born with the social status of their mother. This meant that the children of slave women were born into slavery, even
I actually heard about that law before.
if their fathers were free, European, Christian, and white. This was a reversal of English common law, which held that the children of English subjects took the status of their father. The Virginia colonial government expressed the opinion that since Africans were not Christians, common law could not and did not apply to them, even if they converted, as Anthony Johnson did.
What?
On July 24, 1651, Johnson acquired 200.
That was just a racist law because it said even if they converted to Christian. That was just, we all know that law was crap.
150 acres of land under the existing headright system when he bought the contracts of 5 indentured servants, one being his son, Richard Johnson. Under the headright system, if a man were to bring indentured servants over to the colonies, and in this particular case Johnson brought 5 servants, he was owed 50 acres a head for servant. The land in question was located on the Great Nassawatuk Creek, which flowed into the Punkateague River in Northampton County, Virginia. This was where Anthony Johnson operated his successful tobacco farm, and one of his indentured servants was John Casar, who became one of the first men to be declared indentured for life, effectively a slave. Under the 1645 Virginia Taxation Act, all Negro men and women and all other men from the age of 16 to 60 shall be judged tithable. So after a fire in 1652 caused him great financial damage to his property, he applied for relief in the courts and won. Back then, people were taxed, not property, but indentured servants and later slaves were taxed as property. It is unclear from the records why the John...
Man, what sucks about this is that Anthony Johnson, he saw, like, he was indentured servant. That's what he was prior to, I guess, the rulings of official indentured servitude for life, also known as slavery, came to be. However, when Anthony Johnson was removed from his indentured servitude, one of the first things he did was get his own indentured servant. And that sucks because it kind of paints the picture that although it's happening to us and we see the evil in it, we see the danger in it, we're capable to do it to others as well. And my thoughts kind of go to maybe this is just a human nature thing. It has nothing to do with race. I don't know. It has to do with race, obviously, but maybe it was a human nature thing on a bigger level than it was race, because we're doing it to each other like it's nothing. The first chance they got, he did it. The first chance. And I'm just like, wow.
Johnson women were exempted, but the change gave them the same social standing as white women who were not taxed. In the colonies back then, one was judged more on their religion as opposed to race or ethnicity in general, so until the advent of actual legal slavery, upward mobility was possible for many races. During the case, the justices noted that Anthony and Mary Johnson had lived in Virginia for over 30 years and were highly respected in their community. In fact, a 1653 Northampton County Court document lists Mary as Anthony's wife. By the 1650s, Anthony and Mary Johnson were farming 250 acres in Northampton County, while their two sons owned 550 acres. They also had additional indentured persons under contract, but the exact numbers are not known. His son Richard Johnson also had his own indentured persons, probably given to him by his father, who were effectively slaves with a shelf life. At some point, if contracted, they would have to be set free. In 1854, John Casar, who had been sentenced to indentured service for life for his escaping a previous owner in 1640, filed a suit against Johnson, claiming his indentured service had expired, and he went to work for Robert and George Parker. Johnson filed a freedom suit to get Casar back, but Parker won. What is amazing in retrospect was that Johnson, a black man, was not only able to file a petition to the court, but he was able to testify and give evidence in the court, which illustrates the rather egalitarian system in place at that time. However, Johnson appealed to the County Court of Northampton County, Virginia, and the court reversed its ruling and sent Casar back to Johnson in 1855, and Parker was forced to pay Johnson compensation. Then Casar made history, as he was probably the first person who was declared slave for life in Virginia. That means that his black owner, Anthony Johnson, was probably the very first slave owner in all of the colonies, himself a black man.
Oh my goodness. This dude's... So Jesus. Oh my goodness. So in American history... No. This can't be right.
There were both black and white indentured servants, the whites being the most Irish of all, who, like the blacks, were also sentenced to lifetime servitude before Casar's case. The difference was that the whites could eventually purchase their freedom in most cases. Therefore, Anthony Johnson was apparently not only the first African American whose right to own a slave for life was recognized in the colonies, he was therefore technically the first actual legal slave owner, regardless of being black or white, as established by the Virginia court.
This dude was making American history. The very first African American history fact is probably the darkest I've ever heard. Black History Month, y'all know what that is, February? No wonder they don't teach about this guy, because he was... Oh.
Soon afterwards, slavery was legal in all of the colonies. Later, Johnson moved his family to Somerset County, Maryland, and leased 300 acres for tobacco farming for 99 years, which he called Torrey's Vineyards. When Anthony Johnson died in 1670, that August, his plantation was given to Robert Parker, not to Johnson's children. The justification delivered by an all-right jury ruled that Anthony's land in Virginia that was given to his sons could be seized because he was a Negro and by consequence an alien. As a result, the 50 acres that Anthony had given to his son Richard wound up in the hands of his wealthy white neighbor George Parker. It didn't matter that Richard, a free man, had lived on the land with his wife and children for 5 years. A judge then had ruled that Anthony Johnson, as he was not a citizen of the colony because he was black, but he did own his own slaves, could maintain his property. What soon arrived after Johnson's death was a system of legal slavery in which enslavement was lifelong, hereditary, and based solely on race, and effectively established in all of the colonies in the beginning of the 18th century. As a result, Johnson has been referred to historically as the Black Patriarch of the first community of Negro property owners in America. He was the first black slave owner to be involved in a court case that resulted in an indentured black man, John Casar, to be legally determined as a slave for life. In effect, because hereditary slavery was not in effect during his period of ownership of Castor, the slave for life, and others he purchased, it is arguable that Anthony Johnson was in fact the first actual slave owner in the American colonies, and he was a black man.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say. I'm gonna talk to y'all later. I can't.